All right, let's take a trip way back in time to ancient Greece. We're going to meet one of the most brilliant people who ever lived, a guy who was a scientist, a philosopher, and a teacher who pretty much wrote the instruction manual for the human brain.
So, let me ask you something. Have you ever been in an argument with a friend and you just know you're right, but you can't quite explain why? What do? Just talk louder? Well, it turns out there's a much smarter way to make your point. Believe it or not, more than 2,000 years ago, one guy actually wrote the rulebook for this stuff. He created a system for thinking clearly, so you could win arguments not by being the loudest person in the room, but by being the most logical. His name was Aristotle, and yeah, he basically changed everything.
So who was this guy? Well, before he became this legendary teacher, he was a student himself. And his story, it's a pretty epic one.
Okay, so Aristotle was born way back in 384 BC. When he was just 17, he moved to Athens to study at Plato's academy, which was like the most famous school in the entire world. He ended up staying for 20 years. After that, he got a pretty wild gig, tutoring a kid who would grow up to be Alexander the Great. No big deal, right? And eventually, he went back to Athens to start his own school, called the Lyceum.
And get this, Aristotle wasn't your typical teacher stuck behind a desk. Nope, he loved to teach while walking around the gardens of his school. His students literally followed him around, talking and learning. That's why they got this nickname, the Peripatetics, which is just a fancy Greek way of saying the people who walk about. Kind of cool, huh?
Okay, so let's get into the big stuff. What were these rules of thinking he came up with? See, Aristotle realized it's not just what you think that matters, it's how you think. And that led him to invent something huge. It's kind of hard to imagine, but before Aristotle, there were no real rules for making an argument. It was just chaos. He looked at all this and thought, there has to be a better way. So he created a system, a tool, to help us find the truth and avoid making silly mistakes in our thinking. And he called it logic.
So what does logic even look like? Well, one of his key inventions was something called the syllogism. Sounds complicated, but it's really just a simple three-step formula for building a solid argument. Step 1, you start with a big, true statement. For example, all humans are mortal. Step 2, you add another true but more specific statement, like Socrates is a human. And finally, step 3, you put them together to reach a conclusion that has to be true. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. See? If the first two parts are true, the conclusion is basically guaranteed.
And this really gets to the heart of what he believed. He famously said it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. Basically, being smart isn't just about always being right. It's about being able to listen to an idea, really think about it, even if you totally disagree. It's all about keeping an open mind.
But okay, Aristotle's brain didn't stop with just logic and arguments, not even close. He was also completely fascinated by the natural world. He took that same logical mind and pointed it at plants, animals, everything. And in doing so, he basically became one of the very first biologists. He spent so much time just watching animals, and then he started sorting them into groups. One of his big ideas was to split them into two categories: animals with red blood and animals with no red blood. Now, does that ring a bell? It should. This was the very first step toward our modern idea of vertebrates. That's animals with backbones, and invertebrates, the ones without. He was doing this stuff thousands of years ago. He also had these really deep questions, like, why is a thing a thing? To answer that, he developed this idea called the four causes. Let's use a chair as an example. The material cause is what it's made of, so wood. The formal cause is its blueprint or shape, the chairness of it. The efficient cause is who made it, a carpenter. And the final cause is its purpose, so someone can sit down. For Aristotle, you didn't really get what a chair was until you understood all four of those things. And he didn't just apply this thinking to objects, he applied it to people too. He came up with this concept called the golden mean, which is all about finding balance. The idea is simple. Being a good person means avoiding extremes. The best way to be is usually somewhere right in the middle. Let's use courage as an example. If you have way too little of it, that's cowardice. But if you have way too much, you're just being reckless, right? The golden mean, that perfect spot in between, is true courage. And Aristotle thought this applied to everything, from honesty to generosity. It's all about finding that just right balance. So, okay, this all happened a super long time ago. Why should you care? Why does Aristotle still matter?
Well, because his ideas are literally all around us. They're the foundation for a ton of the stuff we do and think about today.
Think about it. The logic he invented, that's the basis for all computer coding. The way he sorted animals, you still learn that in biology class. Public speaking, debate clubs, science class, even how we think about government, you can trace it all back to him. His fingerprints are everywhere.
Maybe the biggest thing he gave us, though, was a new way of seeing the world. He showed us that it isn't just some big, scary mystery. It's a place that makes sense, a place that we can actually understand. He gave us the two most powerful tools we have to figure it all out: looking closely at things and thinking clearly about them.
What Aristotle really proved is that one person can change the world just by being curious and asking good questions. He didn't just teach us what to think, he taught us how to think. And that leaves us with a pretty important question. What will you ask?